The Rise and Fall of Ancient Ghana audiobook. Produced and written by Ogun Teaches. Chapter 1, Roots and Rise, 300 CE to 800 CE. How the Ghana Empire began. The story of the Ghana Empire begins with the Soninke people. Before Ghana was an empire, the Soninke lived across the western Sahel, in small clans and settlements. Around 300 CE, things began to change. Climate shifts, population movement, growing trade across the Sahel. Survival now required cooperation. Soninke clans began forming alliances, not just for protection, but for stability, order, and leadership. From these alliances, a new system emerged. Power was no longer based on force alone. It was tied to ancestry, spiritual authority, and responsibility to the people. This was the rise of sacred kingship. In West Africa, at the center of this early rise, stands a man remembered in Soninke tradition as the unifier. His name was Dingasis. He lived during the 300s and 400 CE. He did not conquer with armies. He unified through authority and legitimacy. Dingasis brought scattered clans under one political and spiritual leadership. His family line, the Sis dynasty, became the royal house of Ghana. For centuries, he left no stone monuments. Early Ghana built with earth, wood, and clay. But his real legacy was not buildings, it was the creation of a state. Between 400 and 700 CE, Ghana evolved from allied chiefdoms into an organized kingdom. Authority became centralized. Markets became regulated. Agriculture and ironworking expanded. Trade routes became structured. Gold was protected, not exhausted. This balance created long-term stability. By 800 CE, Ghana was no longer a local power. Its name was known across West Africa and into North Africa. Caravans crossed the Sahara to reach its markets. Gold flowed through its territory. Its kings were respected far beyond their borders. While Europe struggled after the fall of Rome, Ghana was rising, organized, wealthy, strategically positioned, at the center of a growing African world. The Ghana Empire did not begin with conquest. It began with unity, with structure, with leadership rooted in ancestry and responsibility. That foundation would shape West Africa for centuries to come. Chapter 2, Spiritual Foundations Before Islam, 300 CE to 800 CE. Before Islam reached the royal courts of Ghana, the empire followed an older African spiritual system. This system was shaped by ancestry, nature, and the balance between the seen and unseen. It was not written in books. It lived in ritual, memory, and daily life. At the center of Soninke belief was a supreme creator. This creator was understood as hidden, eternal, and beyond human form. An unseen source of life, similar to Amen of the Nile Valley. The creator was everywhere, yet represented nowhere. Below the creator were powerful spiritual forces, connected directly to the land. One of the most important was Bida. Bida was a divine serpent spirit, linked to rainfall, fertility, and prosperity, good harvests, healthy livestock, thriving gold trade. All were believed to depend on harmony with this force. This was not superstition. It was a way of understanding climate, seasons, and survival in the Sahel. Earth and sky were also honored as paired cosmic forces. Together, they created life. This mirrors ancient African ideas, seen thousands of years earlier. In the Nile Valley, water held sacred power as well. Rivers and waterways were honored as living spirits. Water meant survival, These beliefs reflected an understanding that nature itself was alive and deserving of respect. Women held major spiritual authority, and this system, queen mothers, priestesses, and lineage keepers guided ritual life. They advised kings, oversaw coronations, interpreted ancestral messages, protected royal bloodlines. No king ruled without spiritual approval. This belief system blended observation, ecology, ancestral memory, and ritual. It was both spiritual and scientific. By the time Ghana rose to fame around 800 CE, it was already a spiritual civilization, rooted in Africa, connected to nature, guided by ancestors. Islam would later arrive through trade, but Ghana's foundations were already strong, built on beliefs as old as Africa itself. Chapter 3: The Arrival of Islam. 800 CE to 1100 CE. Islam did not arrive in Ghana by force. It arrived through trade. By the late 700s and early 800s CE, Muslim merchants from North Africa were crossing the Sahara regularly. They came for gold, salt, ivory, and access to West Africa's markets. These traders did not conquer Ghana. They negotiated with it. They settled near trade centers, lived in their own communities, and practiced Islam among themselves. At first, Ghana's rulers did not convert. They allowed Islam to exist, alongside traditional Sunni beliefs. This created a dual system. African spirituality remained dominant among the people in the royal court. Islam became influential in trade, literacy, and diplomacy. Muslim merchants brought more than goods. They brought written language, Arabic record-keeping, legal contracts, and connections to a wider world, stretching from North Africa to the Middle East. By the 900s CE, some Ghanaian kings began adopting Islam, not as a replacement, but as a tool. Islam helped rulers communicate with foreign merchants. It strengthened trade relationships, improved diplomacy, and increased Ghana's influence beyond the Sahara. Still, conversion was selective. Kings often practiced Islam publicly, while maintaining traditional rituals privately. The people continued honoring ancestors, nature spirits, and sacred customs. This balance kept stability. Early Muslim writers noticed this. They wrote that Ghana's king was Muslim-friendly, but ruled over a largely non-Muslim population. Mosques existed near trade districts. Shrines remained active across the land. Islam adapted to Ghana, not the other way around. This coexistence allowed Ghana to thrive for centuries. Trade expanded. Wealth increased. Power remained centralized. Islam became part of Ghana's story, but it did not erase its African foundations. The empire blended worlds, ancestral tradition at its core, Islam at its borders, both shaping Ghana's golden age. Chapter 4: Women of Ghana, Power Behind the Throne. 400 CE to 1100 CE, women in ancient Ghana were not silent figures. They were central to power. Behind every king stood women who shaped politics, economics, and spiritual life. Ghana followed a matrilineal system. Royal legitimacy passed through the mother's line. A man could not rule unless his mother belonged to a recognized royal lineage. This system protected stability and prevented constant challenges to the throne. Women were the keepers of succession. Among the most powerful figures was the Queen Mother. She advised the king, settled disputes among nobles, approved royal marriages, and safeguarded the future of the dynasty. Kings ruled publicly, but Queen Mothers ensured continuity. Women also powered Ghana's economy. They controlled much of daily production and market life. Women managed agriculture, pottery and crafts, textile weaving and dyeing, gold weighing and measurement, and the distribution of goods in markets. Some women organized and led their own trade caravans across the Sahel. Their work kept trade stable and wealth flowing. Women held spiritual authority as well. High priestesses guided rituals, oversaw coronations, led seasonal and fertility ceremonies, and maintained communication with the ancestors. No king assumed power without spiritual approval. Early Muslim writers noticed this. In the 900s and 1000s, they recorded that women in Ghana moved freely in public, owned property, and managed wealth. These freedoms were uncommon in many other regions at the time. In Ghana, women were not hidden. They were leaders. They protected lineage, sustained the economy, guided spiritual life, and balanced royal power. The strength of the Ghana Empire did not rest on kings alone. It rested on the women who held the empire together. Chapter 5. The Tunka. How power worked in Ghana. 800 CE to 1100 CE. Before understanding how Ghana was ruled, we must understand one word: Tunka. Tunka was the Soninke title for the ruler of the empire. It did not mean conqueror. It did not mean absolute ruler. It meant leader chosen through lineage, legitimacy, and approval. When Arab and North African writers encountered this system, they translated the title Tunka into their own language. They called him Ghana. In Arabic usage, Ghana meant king. Over time, outsiders began calling the entire empire by the title of its ruler. That is why today we call it the Ghana Empire. Not because that was the empire's original name, but because foreigners named the state after its leader. The people themselves still recognized the ruler as the Tunka. The Tunka did not rule by force alone. Power in Ghana was structured to become Tunka. A man had to meet specific conditions. He had to come from the correct maternal lineage. He had to be approved by elder councils. He had to be accepted by spiritual authorities. And he had to demonstrate the ability to govern. This made the process similar to a modern presidential election. Not everyone could run. Not everyone could win. And legitimacy mattered more than ambition. The Tunka ruled publicly, but power was shared. Elders advised them. Queen mothers confirmed succession. Priestesses approved spiritual legitimacy. Officials managed trade and taxation. The Tunka was not above the system. He was accountable to it. His role was to maintain balance between people and ancestors, trade and tradition, wealth and responsibility. If the Tunka failed, he could be removed. Power in Ghana was not permanent. It was conditional. The Tunka lived in a royal court that symbolized authority and order. Foreign visitors described elaborate ceremonies, guarded entrances, and officials who controlled access to power. Gold was regulated, trade was taxed, justice was enforced. This structure allowed Ghana to remain stable for centuries. The Tunka was not worshipped as a god. He was respected as a steward of the state. This is why the system worked. And this is why the name Ghana survives. Not as a people, not as a language, but as a title so powerful that it became the name of an empire and a modern nation. Chapter 6. A kingdom built on gold. 800 CE to 1000 CE. By the 9th century, Ghana controlled the most important gold fields in West Africa. Two regions mattered most: Bambouk and Wangara. These gold fields fueled the empire. Gold was everywhere, but it was tightly controlled. The Tunka kept all gold nuggets. The people traded only in gold dust. This was not greed, it was policy. By controlling nuggets, the Tunka prevented inflation and stabilized the economy. Gold kept its value, wealth stayed centralized. This system made Ghana rich without flooding the market. Gold flowed north across the Sahara. In return came salt, copper, silk, luxury goods, and fine textiles. Caravans stretched for miles. Camels crossed the desert, linking Ghana to North Africa and the Mediterranean world. Ghana sat at the center of global trade. The scholar al-Bakri described Ghana's tax system with precision. 1 dinar was charged on all imported goods. 2 dinars were charged on all exports. No chaos, no guesswork, just regulation. This made Ghana the commercial engine of the Western Sudan. Gold did not make Ghana powerful alone. Control did. Chapter 7. The capital, Kaumbi-Sele, 900 CE to 1100 CE. At the heart of the Ghana Empire stood its capital city, Kaumbi-Sele. By the 900 CE, Kaumbi-Sele was not a single city. It was 2 cities living side by side. One city belonged to the Soninke royal court. This was where the Tunka ruled, where sacred ceremonies took place, where royal officials managed taxation, justice, and diplomacy. The other city belonged to Muslim merchants. This district held mosques, libraries, markets, homes for scholars and traders from across North Africa. The 2 cities were separate, but deeply connected. Trade linked them, law balanced them, and the Tunka stood between both worlds. Travelers describe Kaumbi-Sele as wealthy, organized, and alive. Markets glittered with gold dust. Salt blocks stood taller than men. Iron weapons-lined stalls. Terracotta art-filled courtyards. Griots recited royal history aloud. Drums echoed through public squares. Dancers moved during festivals and ceremonies. Nothing about Kaumbi-Sele was chaotic. It was structured, regulated, intentional. Gold flowed in, goods flowed out. Taxes were collected, and records were kept. Kaumbi-Sele was not just the capital. It was the engine of the empire. A city where Africa met the wider world on African terms. And for centuries, it worked. Chapter 8. Culture, Sports, and Festivals. 800 CE to 1100 CE. Life in Ghana was not only about trade and power. It was about culture, music, movement, competition, and celebration. Daily life was shaped by community. People gathered in courtyards, markets, and open fields to play, perform, and compete. Sports. Physical strength was respected. Popular sports included wrestling, where balance, technique, and endurance mattered more than size. Archery tested focus and precision. Hunters and warriors trained constantly. Strength competitions measured lifting, endurance, and stamina. These games prepared men for war, hunting, and protection of the kingdom. Games, strategy mattered as much as strength. Mancala-style board games were common. Played with seeds or stones, they trained memory, planning, and foresight. Games were played by elders and youth alike, often in public spaces, with entire communities watching. Music and storytelling. Griots preserved history. They memorized royal genealogies, epic stories, and the deeds of ancestors. Drums controlled rhythm and communication. Different beats carried different meanings. Music was not entertainment alone. It was education, memory, identity, dance, and festivals. Festivals marked important moments, harvests, coronations, seasonal changes, spiritual ceremonies. Dancers moved in patterns passed down for generations. Costumes, masks, and body paint represented ancestors and cosmic forces. Festivals united the kingdom. They reminded people who they were, where they came from, and who they served. Culture in Ghana was not separate from power. It strengthened unity, preserved knowledge, and carried the soul of the empire forward. Chapter 9: Priests, Astronomy, and Ceremonial Life. 800 CE to 1100 CE. Ghana's spiritual leadership was not separate from knowledge. It was structured, measured, and deeply scientific. At the center of this system were priests and ritual specialists. They were observers of nature. They studied the sky, tracked the movement of stars, followed lunar cycles, and watched seasonal changes. These observations guided life. Priests predicted rainfall, timed planting and harvest seasons, and advised leaders on when to prepare for drought or abundance. Astronomy was survival. Ceremony was coordination. Priests also oversaw major state rituals. They guided coronations, confirmed the legitimacy of leadership, and ensured the ancestors approved of political decisions. No major transition happened without ritual preparation. Ceremonial life connected the living, the land, and the ancestors. Festivals followed celestial timing. Masks represented cosmic forces. Dancers embodied spirits of nature. Drums synchronized movement and memory. These were not performances. They were systems of alignment between people and land, between leadership and ancestry, between the seen and unseen world. Priests also served as historians. They preserved knowledge through ritual, through oral transmission, through repeated ceremonial practice. This ensured continuity. Spiritual order reinforced social order. By combining astronomy, ritual, and ancestral authority, Ghana maintained balance across generations. This system helped the empire endure, not by force, but by harmony between science and spirit. Chapter 10: Justice and the Prison System. 800 CE to 1100 CE. Justice in Ghana was not about punishment first. It was about restoring balance. Most conflicts were resolved publicly, not violently. Elders, judges, and royal officials listened to both sides, then ruled based on compensation, accountability, and reconciliation. For minor offenses, justice usually meant fines, repayment, or public apology. The goal was to repair harm, not to destroy families or communities. Prisons did exist, but they were not permanent warehouses for people. Those accused of serious crimes, theft, treason, repeated offenses, or threats to the state were held in enclosed compounds near the royal court while judgment was decided. These were temporary holding spaces, not long-term sentences. Punishment varied by offense. Some paid heavy fines. Some were forced into labor. Others were exiled when their presence threatened social harmony. Exile was often considered more severe than imprisonment. To be removed from land, lineage, and community was a serious consequence. Justice in Ghana emphasized order, balance, and collective stability. Not fear, brutality, or mass incarceration. Law existed to protect society, not to exploit it. Chapter 11: The True Decline. 1000 CE to 1200 CE. Ghana did not fall in fire. It faded in silence. For generations, people were told that Ghana collapsed because of invasion. But early records tell a different story. By the early 1000s, the problem was not war. It was movement. Trade routes began to shift. Caravans found new paths across the Sahara. Gold still existed, but it no longer flowed through Ghana alone. The geographer Ibn Hawkle mapped routes that were already bypassing Ghana. The historian Al-Masudi noticed changes in trade patterns and declining royal influence. And in 1068 CE, al-Bakri documented merchants choosing alternate routes that weakened Ghana's control over commerce. Ghana's power depended on regulation, on controlling gold, on taxing trade. When traders stopped passing through, that system broke. At the same time, environmental pressure increased. Drought strained agriculture, pastures shrank, food production declined, vassal states grew restless. Some broke away quietly, others stopped paying tribute. Internal tension also grew. Traditional courts and Muslim merchant communities coexisted for centuries. But as wealth declined, that balance became harder to maintain. By the late 1100s, Ghana still existed in name, but its authority was fractured, its influence reduced, its capital no longer the center of the world it once was. There was no final battle, no dramatic conquest, just an empire, slowly hollowed out. By 1200 CE, Ghana's political core had collapsed, but its systems did not disappear. They remained, waiting. The story does not end here. Chapter 12, Shift in Power After Ghana, 1000 CE to 1200 CE. Ghana did not collapse overnight. It declined slowly. As gold routes shifted away from the old royal centers, power began moving with them. The Muslims already living in West Africa were the first to benefit. These were not outsiders arriving by force. They were merchants, scholars, and families who had lived alongside Ghana for generations. They already had trade connections, stretching across North Africa and into the wider Islamic world. So when caravan routes changed, their networks adapted faster. Gold no longer needed Ghana's royal court to reach the north. Muslim trading communities gained more influence over prices, routes, and exchange points. This shift was economic, not military, but economic power reshaped society. Over time, traditional West African groups began losing control of markets. They once regulated. Customary systems weakened. Royal authority faded. Local chiefs struggled to protect communities from exploitation and imbalance. As wealth moved, social pressure increased. Taxes became harsher. Labor demands grew. Justice became uneven. Traditional systems that once emphasized balance and communal responsibility started breaking down. For many non-Muslim communities, life became more difficult, not because Islam arrived, but because power had shifted away from the old Ghanaian structure that once protected them. By the late 1100s, West Africa stood at a crossroads. The old empire was gone. Trade networks remained, but control had changed hands. And from within this imbalance, new forces began preparing to rise. One of them would be the Mandinka. Conclusion: the legacy of Ghana. The Ghana Empire did not disappear. It transformed from around 400 CE to 1200 CE. Ghana laid the foundation for West African civilization. It proved that African societies could build stable governments, regulated economies, complex trade systems, In spiritual states, long before European contact, Ghana controlled gold. Without minting coins, it regulated markets. Without written law books, it governed through balance between the Tunka and the people, between tradition and change, between land, ancestors, and trade. When Ghana declined, it was not conquered. Its power shifted. Trade routes changed. Political influence moved. New elites rose. But the system Ghana created did not vanish. It spread. Its gold economy became the blueprint. Its tax systems were copied. Its spiritual kingship evolved. Its administrative structure was inherited. Out of Ghana's shadow, new powers emerged, not from nothing, but from what already existed. The manned world would soon reorganize that system, refine it, and expand it further. That story comes next. Ghana was the first great empire of West Africa. Not a myth, not a footnote, not a prelude to Europe. It was a civilization of its own making. A civilization built on gold, guided by spirit, and remembered through legacy. This has been the story of Wagadu, the Ghana Empire, and its influence never truly ended.